The Lebombo Border Post is only partially operational. This is due to post-election violence in neighbouring country Mozambique. For more on this, we're now crossing live to SABC News Reporter NhlanhlaJele. She's at the Border Post for us. Good afternoon, Nhlanhla. Just take us through the very latest, because at some point it was indicated that it's completely closed, and now we understand that it's only partially closed.
Good afternoon to you, Nomfundo, and to the viewers at home. Indeed, the border is partially opened. Earlier on, we did see some of the vehicles actually making their way through to the port of entry. I just stepped out of the shot just to show you what is currently happening. More cars are expected to come. Earlier on, we spoke to some gentlemen who we found here at the port when we arrived, and they said to us they took shelter at a nearby garage last night when they got to the port of entry and found that it was closed. But we understand that this afternoon, now late in the afternoon, Mfundo, the port of entry has been partially opened. Also earlier on the road, about 14 kilometers towards the border post, we saw trucks already lining up. In some other days that we came here sometime last week, there were no trucks at all. It was quiet. But currently what is happening, the port of entry is partially opened. We're just going to speak to the Commissioner of the BMA, Dr. Mike Masiapato, who's just going to tell us about what is currently happening and what we can expect. Dr. Masiapato, thank you so much for your time and for joining us at the SABC this evening. We understand it's partially opened. How long is it going to stay like this, and what are the plans to fully be operational again, especially considering what happened sometime yesterday with the Mozambican counterpart, or the protests action that have been taking place?
No, thanks, Nhlanhla. Maybe the first thing to indicate is that after very extensive engagement with our Mozambican counterpart, they had actually gave us assurance that they have deployed the military on their side to be able to make sure that the situation is stabilized. So on that basis, they did confirm to us that we can actually reopen the port partially. So what actually is happening now is that the port is reopened primarily to allow the Mozambicans that had been on the South African side that are intended to go back home. So on that basis, we are busy processing them as we speak, and they're actually going back home, as it were. But in terms of the trucks that are still on this side, on the corridor, we are not taking them through that side because their guarantee did not cover the issues of the trucks, as it were. They had confirmed that they will be, in a way, escorting their people into the country, and they will basically make sure that there is a safe passage for them. Now, in terms of the return, they are also agreeing that they will actually allow South African empty trucks that are meant to come back into South Africa, and on that basis, we are able to process those ones in. So that is basically the partial reopening up to this point, and of course, we are still assessing the situation, and we should be able to take a decisive decision given what is going to be the results of this process.
Dr. Masiapato, I hear you talking about empty trucks from Mozambique to South Africa. What about South Africans who want to come back to South Africa? Is the border also opened partially for them?
Yeah, no, definitely. If there is any South African who is in Mozambique, who's closer to the port, who will want to come into South Africa via Lebombo, we will be able to process them. So those ones are also covered.
Is Lebombo the only port of entry that is affected in terms of Mozambican entries, or other ports of entry, are they also affected?
No, you see, the port that has been primarily affected is Rasen Garcia, which is Lebombo, the other side of Mozambique. And the reason for that is because this town, Rasen Garcia, in a way, it is exactly on the mouth of the port. And that is the reason why we have this situation. But we have other ports with Mozambique that are not affected at all. For example, Kosi Bay, as it were. There is nothing that is happening that side. And that is why we're saying if there is any South African who would like to come back into South Africa, they can easily use Kosi Bay, as it were. Pafuri up there is also not affected, together with Goriondo on the northern side. So indeed, any South African in Mozambique who will want to come back, they could use any of those ports. But for now, if there is any South African closer to this environment, they can be allowed in.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Masiapato. Fundo, there was BMA Commissioner Dr. Mike Masiapato just giving us a brief explanation of what is expected or is currently happening at the border post. As you've heard him say to us, that the border has been indeed partially opened for any Mozambican that wishes to cross and move back to Mozambique. And of course, South Africans who are also in Mozambique and wish to come back to South Africa, the border has been opened for them. And as for the trucks, as I mentioned earlier on, they are stretching about 14 kilometers from the border post, in a queue waiting to be checked for them to go to Mozambique. He said to us that they are not being processed at the moment because talks are still happening and talks are still ongoing in terms of guaranteeing and ensuring that it is very safe for everybody to pass through the border post, and of course, Nomfundo, to fully open the border post as it was the previous days.